My name's Natalie, and I'm 28 years old. I always believed that family was supposed to be your safe harbor, your unwavering support system, the people who would stand by you no matter what. I learned the hardest way possible that this isn't always true. When I discovered that my own parents, the two people who raised me, had drained $69,000 from a savings account I thought was my financial safety net, I honestly thought my world had ended. Everything I had worked for, every sacrifice I'd made, every dream I had for my future, it felt like it evaporated in an instant. But it didn't end there. Instead, my world, as I knew it, cracked wide open. It was a shattering, yes, but also a forced awakening. A painful, blinding light exposing truths I had conveniently ignored for years. The obvious questions swirled in my head like a storm. Why would they do this? Why would they betray my trust so profoundly? And perhaps even more agonizing, why would they lie to me about it for months, pretending everything was fine while secretly dismantling my financial security? The deceit, the calculated withholding of information, felt like a deeper wound than the theft itself. And then, the moment that truly scorched a mark on my soul. My dad, Richard, looked me straight in the eye, his gaze unwavering, as he calmly uttered the words that would echo in my mind for years to come. The family needed it more. The family, that phrase, almost a sacred incantation in our household, used to justify everything from missed vacations to sacrificed personal ambitions. But this time, it felt like a weapon aimed directly at my heart. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the utter disregard for my autonomy, my hard work, my future. It was about defining me not as an individual with my own aspirations, but as merely a resource for the family's needs. That night, after those chilling words had settled in the stunned silence of our living room, something inside me shifted. A realization, cold and stark, settled over me. I looked at the crumbling facade of what I thought was unwavering familial love, and I made a decision I never, in my wildest dreams, thought I would ever make. It was a decision born from deep betrayal, from anger, from a profound sense of self-preservation. It was a decision that would redefine not just my relationship with my parents, but my entire understanding of family, loyalty, and what it truly means to stand up for yourself. It was a night where everything changed. Have you ever felt that gut-wrenching pain of being betrayed by someone you trusted most, someone you believed would always have your back? Let me know in the comments below. I'm sure I'm not alone in this. And please, don't forget to tap like and subscribe to my channel. You absolutely won't want to miss what happened next. This story, I promise you, takes turns you never expect. Growing up in East LA, our family wasn't exactly struggling, but we weren't exactly thriving either. My dad, Richard, was a construction manager, always grafting, always coming home tired. My mom, Maria, was a homemaker, and her world revolved around us, her children. There was always this underlying current of economic anxiety, a constant hum of needing to make ends meet. I suppose that's where my drive came from, this innate desire to not just survive, but to excel, to build a life where those anxieties were a distant memory. From a young age, I was, for lack of a better term, the golden girl. Not because I was inherently more special, but because I was the one who seemed to effortlessly achieve what my parents had always dreamed of for us. Scholarships became my stepping stones. I pored over textbooks, spent late nights in the library, and meticulously planned my academic trajectory. While my friends were out, I was studying, driven by a quiet, insistent pressure, not just from my parents, but from myself. I felt a responsibility to make their sacrifices worthwhile. I remember my dad constantly reminding me, we didn't have these opportunities, Hija. You have to make the most of it. My mom, with her gentle voice, would say, everything we do for you children. It wasn't manipulative at the time, not overtly. It just felt like the natural order of things. Their dreams became intertwined with mine. And I delivered. I graduated at the top of my class, secured a full scholarship to a prestigious university, and after years of intense work, landed a high-paying tech job in Silicon Valley right out of college. I was living the dream they had always envisioned for me, for us. I was stable, successful, capable. But with that success came a different kind of pressure, a subtle, unspoken expectation that began to weigh heavily on my shoulders. It coalesced into a whisper that grew louder with every promotion, every bonus. You owe your family. We helped you get here. It wasn't a direct demand, Not at first. It was woven into conversations, wrapped in expressions of pride, layered beneath affirmations of how much they loved me. A new car for my brother, Leo, because his old one was unreliable and he needed it for job interviews. Help with unexpected medical bills for an extended family member. A generous gift for my parents to update their kitchen, which then became an expectation for me to continue contributing to other home improvements. Every request, every need presented itself with the implicit understanding that I was financially capable, and thus obligated. It was never questioned. My resources were, in unspoken agreement, communal. I was the lifeline, the primary breadwinner, the one who could solve problems with a well-placed transfer. That guilt, that ingrained sense of obligation that I had absorbed since childhood, became like a rope around my neck. A comfortable, familiar rope at first. One that felt like love and duty. But slowly, imperceptibly, it tightened. I was the achiever, the success story, but I was also becoming the family's ATM, a role I hadn't consciously chosen, but one that had been subtly, expertly assigned to me. And I was too deep into it, too entangled in the web of familial expectation and my own ingrained loyalty to ever question it. Not yet. Anyway, my savings account wasn't just a random collection of numbers. It was a carefully constructed vision of my future. Every extra shift, every frugal meal, every deferred pleasure during those intensely demanding years in my tech job was poured into that account. It was specifically earmarked for a down payment on my own home, a goal that felt less like a luxury and more like a necessity for my own independence and stability. I had managed to accrue what felt like a significant amount, $69,000. It represented freedom. Given my demanding work schedule, and because I trusted him implicitly with all things financial, I had asked my father, Richard, to help me set up and occasionally manage this high-yield savings account. He'd always been the one to handle the family finances, the one who navigated the complexities of banks and investments. It felt like a smart, practical decision at the time. I gave him the login details, never imagining for a second that this trust would be so profoundly violated. The first hint that something was amiss wasn't a sudden, dramatic discovery. It was a slow, creeping unease. I had finally found a condo that felt right, a small place in a great neighborhood, and I was ecstatic. I went to transfer the funds for the down payment from the account, but the numbers on the screen didn't make sense. Not even close. My heart started to race. I refreshed the page. No change. The substantial sum I had worked so hard for, my $69,000, was simply gone. Panic set in. I immediately called my father, my voice tight with a fear I tried desperately to control. "Dad, what happened to the account?" "The money's not there." He mumbled something about a technical glitch, a system error, telling me not to worry. He'd look into it a few hours later. I called my mother, Maria, sensing that something was terribly wrong. She sounded flustered, avoiding direct answers, redirecting the conversation to anything but the missing funds. She claimed ignorance, saying she knew nothing about the account's balance, that Richard handled everything. Their coordinated evasiveness was almost as damning as the empty account. The silence that followed those first few harrowing phone calls was deafening. Days turned into a week, filled with my increasingly desperate attempts to get a straightforward answer. Finally, after my relentless calls and texts, my father agreed to meet me. We sat in a quiet corner of a coffee shop, the air thick with unspoken tension. I looked him in the eye, my voice trembling as I asked, "Dad, where is my money?" He took a deep breath, avoiding my gaze, and then, in a low, almost indifferent tone, delivered the line that would shatter everything. "The family need, edit more." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. My mind reeled. The family needed it more? What did that even mean? I had just handed over my entire savings, my future security, based on what? A nebulous, undefined need? I pressed him. Needed it for what? What family? No one seemed to be suddenly better off. Leo wasn't driving a new car. The house looked the same. What could possibly have been so urgent, so dire, that it required emptying my life savings without even a conversation? But he offered no further explanation, just a stony silence, punctuated by occasional sighs of what sounded like exasperation, as if I was the one being unreasonable. The realization washed over me like a cold wave. This wasn't just about the money. This was about a complete disregard for my autonomy, my hard work, my trust. It was a profound betrayal, cloaked in the guise of familial obligation. That night, sleep was impossible. The shock, the anger, the raw ache of dishonesty festered. And as the initial days began to lift, a new, fierce resolve began to take root. If they wouldn't tell me where my money went, I would find out myself, and my father's vague, dismissive explanation. The family needed it more, was completely unsatisfying. My mind, trained in logic and problem solving through years of software engineering, couldn't accept such an abstract answer for such a concrete sum of money. If the money was used for the family, why did nothing seem to have changed? No new car in the driveway, no lavish vacations, no sudden influx of cash into my brother's struggling startup. Leo was still living at home, still talking about his latest disruptive idea while working a part-time job. So I decided to become my own investigator. I needed to see the paper trail, the evidence, the cold, hard facts that would explain the disappearance of my future. Remembering that I had given my father access to that account for management, I also recalled that I had set up some alerts and linked it to my personal email for statements. I started there. It was a tedious, painful process, sifting through months of transactions, looking for that one large withdrawal. And then I found it a single, massive transfer, dated just a few weeks before I attempted to access the funds. It wasn't a series of smaller payments for bills or a discrete amount for a car. It was one lump sum transferred directly to a mortgage company, their mortgage company, my parents' mortgage company. The pieces started to click into place, forming a picture I never anticipated. I remembered snippets of conversations, loose talk at a casual family barbecue a few months prior. My mother had been quieter than usual, but my father had been almost jovial, making comments about finally being free, no more burdens over our heads, and looking forward to a stress-free retirement. At the time, I'd assumed he meant something minor, like paying off a credit card or a car loan. My contribution to our family had been ongoing, but this was on a completely different scale. It suddenly made sense why Leo hadn't benefited directly. This was explicitly about their comfort, not his. They had used my savings, my $69,000, to clear their mortgage. Behind my back, without a single word, a single request, or a single acknowledgement. They hadn't paid off bills or bought a new car. They had bought themselves a life of stress-free retirement, funded entirely by my years of hard work and sacrifice. The revelation hit me with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't just the money. It was the audaciousness of it. The sheer entitlement. To take such a significant chunk of my life, my future, and then to justify it with the flimsy excuse of the family needed it more, when it was clearly about their comfort, their peace of mind. They hadn't asked because they knew I would have said no. Or at the very least, I would have asked for repayment, for a plan. I would have wanted input. They bypassed all of that because in their minds they deserved it, and I was merely a means to that end. This wasn't about me helping my family. This was about them taking from me, knowingly, deliberately, and then constructing an elaborate pretense of denial. The tears that came were not of sadness, but of pure, incandescent rage. They had treated me not as a daughter, but as a financial utility, a wellspring they could tap at will. The blind trust I had placed in them felt like a burning shame, a scar on my judgment. I had always tried to understand their struggles, their desires for a better life. But this wasn't about struggling. This was about luxury, about their personal comfort, at my expense. And they were going to have to face what they had done Sunday dinner. A ritual as old as I was. Every week, like clockwork, we gathered at my parents' house, my parents, my brother Leo, and me. It was supposed to be a sacred time, a communal space for family bonding, laughter, and sharing. But that particular Sunday, the air crackled with a tension that was anything but sacred. I had prepared. I had rehearsed. The cold, hard facts of the mortgage statements were burned into my memory, fueling a righteous anger that left no room for the usual pleasantries. The pot roast was on the table, the familiar scent filling the room, but my appetite had vanished. I waited for a lull in the conversation, the usual small talk about work and Leo's latest startup idea. Then I cleared my throat, forcing my voice to be steady, even though my hands were trembling under the table. So I found out where my $69,000 went. I began, my gaze sweeping from my father's face to my mother's and finally to Leo, who immediately stiffened. My dad, Richard, visibly flinched. My mother, Maria, gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes darting between Richard and me. Leo, ever the master of uncomfortable silence, just looked down at his plate. It went to pay off your mortgage, I continued, my voice gaining strength, each word deliberate, cutting through the silence. All of it. My savings for a down payment gone. Because the family needed it more, right, Dad? Or because you deserve to live stress-free in retirement? The last words were laced with bitter irony. The room erupted. My mother, Maria, immediately burst into tears, a familiar tactic. Natalie, please. Don't do this here. We're a family. She sobbed, burying her face in her hands. It was the same performative distress she always displayed when confronted with anything unpleasant. My father's face hardened. He slammed his fork down on the table, the clatter echoing in the sudden quiet. How dare you? He bellowed, his voice laced with indignation. After everything we've done for you. Bringing this up now at Sunday dinner? You are selfish, Natalie. Unbelievably selfish. Selfish? The word hit me like a physical blow. Me, the one who had consistently provided, who had put their needs before my own for years. My blood boiled. Selfish? Is it selfish to expect honesty? To expect respect for my own hard work? You stole from me. You took my future without asking, without even a conversation. Leo, who had been conspicuously silent, finally spoke up, his voice surprisingly firm. Natalie, you have a good job. You can make it back. Mom and Dad worked their whole lives. They deserve peace. He looked at me with an expression of impatient dismissal, as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. His words only fueled my fury. He understood nothing of true struggle, always shielded, always taken care of. So, my money is your peace? My financial security is less important than your deserved retirement? I shot back at him, then turned my gaze back to my parents. You didn't ask me. You didn't even tell me. You thought you could just take it because you saw me as an endless resource, a bottomless bank account. My mother's sobs grew louder. My father, Richard, stood up, his face red. You have no idea what we've sacrificed, he roared. You think life is easy? We carried this family. You owe us. I owe you? I laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. I don't owe you this. I paid my way. I worked. I provided. This isn't about obligation. It's about outright theft and blatant disrespect. The dinner, the peace, the pretense of a happy family shattered around us. I stood up, pushing back my chair with a screech that cut through the cacophony. I knew then, with absolute clarity, that there was no reasoning with them, no acknowledgement to be found. They were so deeply entrenched in their narrative of sacrifice and entitlement that my pain, my betrayal, was just an inconvenient truth to be dismissed. I can't do this, I said, my voice quiet but firm, overriding the chaos. I grabbed my purse. I can't sit here and pretend this is normal. You want your peace? Fine, but not at the cost of mine. I walked out. The sounds of my mother's wails and my father's angry shouts echoed Behi, and me as I pushed open the front door and stepped into the cool night air. The betrayal wasn't just about the money. It was that they did it without even asking me, like I didn't matter, like my feelings, my future were utterly disposable. And as I drove away from that house, the place that was supposed to be my home, I felt utterly, completely isolated. But also, for the first time, a flicker of something new. A fierce determination to reclaim what was mine, not just financially, but emotionally. Each days following that chaotic Sunday dinner were a blur of intense emotion and shocking silence. I spiraled completely. The carefully constructed life I had built, so stable and logical on the surface, felt like it was crumbling. The betrayal, the hypocrisy, the sheer audacity of my family's reaction, it all weighed on me. It wasn't just the $69,000. It was the theft of trust, the shattering of an illusion I had held onto for so long. I started therapy. It felt like an admission of brokenness, but I was broken. My therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Evelyn, helped me untangle the knots in my mind. She listened patiently as I recounted years of subtle manipulations, of being guilt-tripped into financial contributions, of always being the responsible one, the fixer. It was in those sessions that I began to truly revisit my childhood, not through the rose-tinted glasses of nostalgia, but with the painful clarity of hindsight. I realized how I had always been treated as a resource, as a bank, rather than a daughter in the fullest sense of the word. My value, in their eyes, seemed intrinsically linked to my earning potential and my willingness to share it. My phone, which used to be a lifeline to my family, became a source of dread. Every time it rang with my father's name on the caller ID, a jolt of anxiety shot through me. My mother's texts were a mix of passive-aggressive guilt trips and thinly veiled attempts to get me to resolve things. Leo sent angry, accusatory messages, calling me a monster for tearing the family apart. I stopped answering. I couldn't bear to hear their voices, their manufactured victimhood, their complete inability to acknowledge the depth of their transgression. Each ring, each vibration, felt like an assault. Sometimes I felt an almost uncontrollable urge to hurl my phone across the room, just to silence it. My job, which had always been a source of pride and stability, suffered. My focus was shot. I'd stare at lines of code, my mind replaying conversations, dissecting every word, searching for a sign I had missed, a clue to their capacity for such deception. My productivity plummeted. My manager, sensing something was profoundly wrong, called me into his office. I tried to deflect, but my exhaustion and emotional distress were undeniable. He suggested I take some time off, 2 weeks unpaid leave, to sort things out. It felt like another failure, another consequence of their actions, but I desperately needed the space. During those 2 weeks, I mostly stayed in my apartment, staring at the walls, thinking. The silence was unnerving at first, but slowly, it started to become a sanctuary. I walked around my apartment, every object reminding me of the security my parents had just destabilized. I had lived a life of constant striving, always pushing for more, saving meticulously, specifically to avoid the financial struggles I saw around me growing up. And with one audacious act, they had pulled the rug out from under me. The anger was a burning fire, but beneath it, a tiny, defiant spark of clarity began to glow. I was not powerless. They had taken my money, yes, but they hadn't taken me. They hadn't taken my intelligence, my resilience, my capacity to earn, or my ability to make choices. The silence from them, the lack of apology, the sheer audacity of their continued demands, only solidified my resolve. They wanted me to feel guilty, to give in, to forgive and forget. But I couldn't. Not this time. This time, there would be consequences. And I would be the one setting the terms during those 2 weeks of unpaid leave. When I was spiraling and trying to make sense of everything, I found myself doing a lot of mindless scrolling through social media. I saw an old post from Tina Ongwain, a friend from college. She was celebrating a new milestone in her career as a real estate attorney. Seeing her name, I felt a sudden impulse, a faint spark of an idea. I wasn't looking for legal advice, not exactly. I just needed to vent to someone who understood, someone outside the family drama, who also understood the intricacies of property and finance. I called her. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright and familiar. Natalie! Long time no see. What's up? I took a deep breath. Tina, you will not believe the mess I'm in, I began, and then meticulously laid out the entire story. My upbringing, the ATM roll, the missing $69,000, my dad's casual confession, my investigation, the Sunday dinner explosion. I recounted every detail, every betrayal, every stinging word. Tina listened patiently, her usual sharp wit muted, replaced by thoughtful silence. When I finished, the line was quiet for a moment. Wow, Nat, she finally said, her voice softer than usual. That's a lot. I'm so sorry you're going through that. Then her pragmatic lawyer brain seemed to click into gear. Listen, you mentioned something early on when you were explaining how your dad managed the account. You said you were making the main mortgage payments on their house. In your name. For tax benefits, I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Yeah, that's right. My dad set it up that way years ago, said it was smart for deductions. I'd send him money, and he'd use my bank account information for the payments. It was just a regular thing, another way I was helping out. Tina paused again, and I could practically hear the gears turning in her head. Okay, Nat, this changes things. This changes everything, actually. My brow furrowed. How? Well, she explained, her voice picking up speed. If you were technically the one making the payments, even if the funds originated from your paycheck, that creates a paper trail connecting you directly to the property. Depending on how it was all structured and the exact language on those payment records, you could have a significant legal standing. My mind raced. Legal standing for what? To sue them for the $69,000? I asked cynically. The idea of suing my own parents felt abhorrent even amidst my anger. No, not just for the money, Tina clarified. I mean, you could, but that's not what I'm thinking. What you just told me. The funds being used to pay off the mortgage payments having been made in your name. What if, for example, we explore reversing the payoff? I literally choked on my breath. Reversing it? Is that even possible? It's complicated, and we'd need to look at all the specifics. But think about it. If the mortgage was paid off using funds that can be traced back to you, and there's a history of you making payments on that loan, there might be a case. It might be possible to argue that it was an unauthorized payoff of a debt you had a vested interest in, particularly if those tax benefits meant you were legally tied to the payments in some capacity. It could be argued that the property was essentially debt-free at your expense without your consent. Tina's voice was buzzing with a newfound energy. This isn't just about the $69,000, Nat. This is about legal leverage. Your name on that paperwork was more than just symbolic. It means you weren't powerless. Her words hit me like a lightning bolt. Not powerless. The weight of betrayal, of feeling like a victim, a puppet whose strings had been cut, began to lift, replaced by a surge of adrenaline. This wasn't just venting. This was a game plan. This was a path to reclaiming not just my money, but my agency. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. With cold, clear clarity, I initiated the proceedings to unwind my parents' paid-off mortgage. After Tina's call, the anger hadn't dissipated, but it had transmuted into something more potent, resolve. Tina confirmed the legal standing, outlining the specifics. Because I had been making the mortgage payments in my name, albeit with funds from my own accounts, it created a direct, undeniable link. My father had set it up for tax benefits, but what he saw as a clever financial maneuver, Tina saw as a legal lifeline for me. He had inadvertently given me power. The logistics were meticulous, bordering on bureaucratic ballet. There were forms to fill, affidavits to sign, meetings with bank officials who, at first, looked at me with a mixture of confusion and skepticism. It wasn't a typical request. You want to undo a paid-off mortgage? They'd ask, their eyebrows raised. Each time, I'd calmly explain that the sum used for the payoff was from funds wrongfully acquired from me, funds that I could demonstrate were mine, and that the previous payments on the mortgage had been executed under my name since the beginning. Tina was instrumental, guiding me through every step, drafting the necessary legal letters, making sure every I was dotted and every T was crossed. I remember the exact moment I signed the final document. It wasn't a dramatic flourish, but a quiet, almost surgical precision. My hand, steady, firm. I wasn't shaking with rage, but with a strange, chilling sense of purpose. I imagined my parents' disbelief, their fury, when they realized what was happening. They never imagined I would have the means, or the guts, to execute such a move. They expected me to eventually come crawling back, to forgive, to forget. They expected me to yield to their narrative of familial obligation. But my signature on that paper was a declaration of independence, a stark rebuttal to their presumption. It wasn't just about the money. It was about reclaiming my narrative, establishing a boundary they had so carelessly trampled. Then came the waiting. It wasn't long. The wheels of bureaucracy, once set in motion, turned inexorably. The bank processed the legal challenge. They looked at the payment history, the source of the payoff funds, and the legal arguments Tina presented. They had a duty to protect their interests, and the evidence I provided was compelling. And then, the phone call. My father, Richard. The number flashed on my screen, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't flinch. I answered. His voice was a mixture of shock, confusion, and utterly raw indignation. Natalie, what have you done? The bank. They said the mortgage is back on. That we have to start making payments again. What is this? He sounded genuinely bewildered, as if the concept of consequence was entirely alien to him. The indignation in his tone was almost comical, given the circumstances. He was outraged, not that he had stolen from me, but that I had dared to disrupt his hard-won, ill-gotten comfort. And that's when the tears came. But they weren't tears of sadness or regret. They weren't tears for the money or for the broken family. They were tears of pure, unadulterated relief, of vindication. They were tears of a burden finally lifted, a realization that I had, for once, truly stood up for myself. I didn't cry for what was lost, but for what I'd found. My own strength, my own voice, and the chilling yet empowering knowledge that I had the power to make them truly understand the weight of their actions. The feeling was profoundly unsettling, yet undeniably exhilarating. The THE phone call was just the beginning. After my dad's initial outburst of disbelief and outrage, the begging started. He called back, hours later, his tone dramatically shifted from furious indignation to plaintive desperation. "Natalie, please, you can't do this to us. We're your parents. Where are we going to get the money? You know we live on a fixed income." He sounded genuinely panicked, as if the mortgage returning was an act of inexplicable cruelty rather than a direct consequence of his own actions. My mother, Maria, joined the chorus of pleas, but her approach was different. She called me, not to apologize, not to acknowledge the pain they had caused, but to lay on the guilt. "How could you be so heartless, Hija? After everything we did for you. This will break your father. You're destroying your own family." When I tried to explain, to articulate the depth of their betrayal and my reasons, she simply hung up on me. Not once, but twice. Each time, the message was clear. My feelings didn't matter. Only their comfort and their perception of what was due to them. Then came Leo, my brother. He wasn't begging. He was accusatory. "You're a monster, Natalie. How can you do this to Mom and Dad? They sacrificed everything for us. You're tearing this family apart." His words lacked any understanding of my perspective. He, who had always been shielded and supported, never really grasping the reality of their alleged sacrifice or the full extent of my financial burden, was now demanding that I maintain their comfort, even at my own expense. He framed it as my destruction of the family, not their pervasive pattern of entitlement. But for the first time, I didn't flinch. Their pleas, their guilt trips, their anger, it all washed over me without sticking. The tears of vindication had cleared my vision. I saw their reactions for what they were, a desperate attempt to regain control, to reestablish the old dynamic where I was the giver and they were the perpetual recipients. I responded to their calls with a cold, unwavering clarity. To my father, I stated calmly, "The mortgage is back on. You have two choices. Settle the debt you took from me or start paying the mortgage again. The bank will be expecting payments, just like before." To my mother's hang-ups, I sent a single, concise text. "Your comfort was my $69,000. You chose it. Now you live with the consequences." And to Leo, who continued his accusations, I simply said, "No, Leo. They tore the family apart when they stole from me. I'm just putting the pieces back where they belong. I wasn't looking for the $69,000 back, not really. The primary goal wasn't financial restitution. It was acknowledgement. It was for them to understand the profound impact of their betrayal, to grasp that their actions had real, tangible consequences for someone who wasn't them. I wanted them to feel the discomfort they had so carelessly inflicted on me. I wanted them to realize that their sense of entitlement would no longer be funded by my silence or my labor. It wasn't about revenge. It was about boundaries. It was about standing up for myself, firmly and unequivocally. It was about ensuring that they could no longer treat me as an endless resource, but as an individual deserving of respect and honesty. What goes around truly does come around. And for them, it came around in the form of a rekindled monthly mortgage payment. After the storm of calls and accusations, I stepped away from my family. Not in a fit of rage, but with a deliberate, resolute calm. It wasn't a sudden break, but a conscious, necessary detachment. For over a year, I maintained almost no contact. No Sunday dinners, no casual phone calls, no obligation-laden texts. The silence was initially unsettling, a stark contrast to the constant hum of familial expectation that had defined my life. But slowly, it transformed into a profound sense of peace. This period became a time of intense personal rebuilding. The therapy I had started in the immediate aftermath of the betrayal became a cornerstone of my healing. Dr. Evelyn helped me peel back the layers of guilt, of obligation, of feeling like my worth was tied to my ability to provide. I began to understand the generational patterns, the unspoken rules that had governed our family, and how they had shaped my role as the golden girl turned ATM. Recognizing these dynamics allowed me to dismantle them within myself, to truly internalize that I was not responsible for their choices or their financial well-being. I invested heavily in my mental health. I started hiking, finding solace in the vast, open spaces of California's trails. I reconnected with friends, building a support system that truly saw and valued me for who I was, not for what I could provide. For the first time in my adult life, my decisions were solely my own, unburdened by the invisible threads of familial expectation. My job no longer suffered. With renewed focus and a clearer mind, I excelled. My ambition, once driven by a subconscious need to prove my worth to my family, now propelled me forward purely for my own growth and satisfaction. It felt liberating. With my remaining savings and the consistent income from my job, I made another significant step towards my independence. I bought a modest condo in Oakland. It wasn't the spacious place I had initially dreamed of with my $69,000, but it was mine. Every nail hammered, every paint stroke felt like an act of reclaiming my future. It was a tangible testament to my resilience, a physical space that symbolized my hard-won peace. About a year and a half after I canceled the mortgage, a small, unassuming envelope arrived in my mail. It was a card, plain and simple, no frills. Inside, in my mother's familiar handwriting, were just a few lines. "We were wrong. We're sorry." It wasn't a grand apology. It wasn't a detailed acknowledgement of the immense pain they had caused. There was no mention of the money, or the mortgage, or the years of expectation. It was brief, almost insufficient. A part of me, the still wounded part, wanted more. I wanted them to truly understand, to articulate the depth of their error. But it was something. It was the first time they had ever admitted fault, however vaguely. It was a crack in bare impenetrable wall of self-righteousness. It wasn't restitution, and it wasn't enough to erase the past. But it was a quiet opening. It indicated that perhaps the consequence they faced had, in some small way, forced them to confront their actions. I didn't immediately call them. I didn't send a gushing text. I simply held the card, felt the quiet shift within me, and placed it on my desk. It wasn't a full reconciliation, not yet, but it was a small, fragile seed of potential connection on my terms. My peace wasn't dependent on their apology, but it was a gentle affirmation that my decision, however painful, had made a difference. Would I do it again? Absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, hell yes. This past year, and the journey that led me here, has been the hardest of my life. It cut me to my core, forcing me to confront painful truths about my family, myself, and the insidious nature of unresolved expectations. But it also propelled me into a period of profound self-discovery and growth that I wouldn't trade for anything. Money, I've learned, can be replaced. My original $69,000, while a significant sum, pales in comparison to the value of what I gained in return, my self-worth. For years, I was trapped in a dynamic where I was the family's ATM, their lifeline, implicitly responsible for their comfort and security, often at the expense of my own. That guilt, that ingrained belief that I owed them, had been a cage, invisible but unbreakable. It took their ultimate betrayal, taking my diligently saved future funds without a second thought or a word of discussion, to finally shatter that cage. It was a brutal awakening, but it was an awakening nonetheless. They showed me, in the clearest possible terms, that their comfort superseded my needs, my dreams, and my very personhood. And in that clarity, I found my power. I rescued myself. I stopped waiting for them to acknowledge their wrongdoing, to apologize sincerely, or to somehow make up for the damage. Instead, I took agency. I set boundaries. I used the tools at my disposal, born of the very financial arrangements they had initiated, to reclaim my position not as a vessel for their needs, but as an independent, capable individual. The decision to put their mortgage back on was not about revenge, though the immediate satisfaction was undeniable. It was about creating a consequence that forced them to confront their actions, to feel the ripple effect of their choices. It was about demonstrating that my contributions were not infinite, nor were they an entitlement. And it was about finally, unequivocally, standing up for myself in a way I had never dared before. I'm still healing. The scars of betrayal run deep. My relationship with my family is irrevocably changed, and while there's a flicker of hope for reconciliation, it will be on vastly different terms. Terms that prioritize mutual respect, honesty, and genuine care, rather than one-sided obligation. But I am stronger, clear, and more grounded than I have ever been. I have built a life defined by my choices, not their expectations. The modest condo in Oakland, purchased with my remaining savings and earned by my own effort, feels like the ultimate sanctuary. It's a space where my peace is non-negotiable. So if you're out there grappling with similar family dynamics or feeling drained by unspoken expectations, remember this. Your self-worth is priceless. It cannot be bought, sold, or taken, and sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself, and perhaps even for others, is to draw a clear line and to rescue yourself. Would you cancel your parents' mortgage if they stole from you? Let me know in the comments below. I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on this. And if this story resonated with you, please like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe for more true stories like this one. Your support means the world to me as I continue to navigate this journey.